Atomic Heart was one of the best RPG games that I've played recently. The story and the world were very enjoyable, while the combat and just really weird sections of the game kept me hooked. I definitely recommend it to anyone who enjoys Fallout or BioShock. Now let's talk about why. So the story of Atomic Heart is fantastic. The amount of foreshadowing and narrative building is exceptional, and I had a blast playing through it trying to guess where this thing was headed the entire time. And even though like the clues and the hints and the info was sort of right in my face, I was really surprised at the ending to this really kind of wild ride. Now, no spoilers, but just to give sort of a quick summary to set this thing up if you haven't looked at Atomic Heart at all. So you play as P3, a secret agent who is tasked to find out what is happening at Facility 3826 in an alternate reality USSR. Now, this facility is the crown jewel basically of humanity in the USSR. Everything is fantastic. Robots do everything. You just kind of live your life and it's like utopia. However, the robots became violent, dangerous plants are mutating people, and you need to track down the man who's responsible for everything. Now that's where I'll go ahead and leave it, but if you're someone who enjoys a good story-driven RPG, this is definitely one that I think you will enjoy. So the next thing I want to talk about is combat. So this has been a divisive topic from what I've seen on social media and other reviews out there. There are folks who say the combat is boring and repetitive because enemies are so spongy and they're always in your face. Others applaud the combat for being immersive and fine-tuned. Now for me, I enjoyed it, right? I'd say I'm kind of in the middle. I'm not gonna say the gunplay is way better than like Destiny or Call of Duty or these other games that have truly made their fortune on shooting stuff. But what I will say is that it was definitely serviceable for what the game requires you to do. So combat is broken down into three parts. You have skills, you have melee, and you have ranged. Now ranged is broken into two parts as well. You have ammo and energy. Ammo is as it sounds. You need ammo to fire the weapon, where energy weapons are fueled by energy that is generated over time or through melee attacks. So you can choose to have both, just one of these things. Now I would recommend both. It does make things a lot easier since enemies do have resistances and weaknesses to certain damage types. So being able to take all of this stuff with you is probably for the best. Now as for melee, this is very straightforward. You get near something and you hit it with your weapon until it falls apart. Now, like I mentioned, these attacks will refill your energy, and because of that, you can easily form like some synergy between energy weapons and melee, which is what I did through a lot of it. I typically carried a melee weapon, the Vezdochka, which is the like two-bladed sort of axe thing. It's a mace-looking weapon. And then I carried the Kalash, which is an AK-47, and I carried the Dominator, which is the one we've seen that shoots out like ball lightning and things like that. So that was my typical setup, and it took me from point A to point B to point C all the way through the game. Now skills, on the other hand, these are completely opt-in. So you get shock as a default at the very beginning because it's used in puzzles and it's a requirement to progress in the game. But other than that, you can completely avoid skills if you want to. I wouldn't recommend it. It makes life way easier, but if you wanted to play completely skillless, you could. Now, your skills do range from stuff like shooting out polymer goo to slow down enemies or to amplify your elemental attacks. You also have a polymer shield that protects and reflects damage to attackers. You have telekinesis that you can lift up and smash enemies. And then you have frostbite, which freezes and stops enemies in their tracks. Now, all of these come with their own skill tree that you can upgrade by spending neuropolymer, which is a substance that you get from killing enemies. And all three of these parts come together to form the entire combat experience in Atomic Heart. And with some of the bosses and enemies that you're going to fight, you probably need all of them. I know I used all of them all of the time. Just like my weapons, I had a certain set of skills that I really liked. I really liked the mass telekinesis, where I could lift enemies up and then slam them into the ground. And I also liked shield. It worked out really well for the build that I went with, and it basically enabled me to be incredibly tanky while dishing out a ton of damage. It was great. Now, speaking of all that, I did want to touch on difficulty really quick because this has been another thing that I've seen people talking about in the game. So Atomic Heart has three difficulty choices. You have easy, normal, and hard, and they're not as normal or simple as they seem. In fact, I kind of went through and relabeled them a little bit to be more clear to people when I'm talking to them about what difficulties there are. So easy is like your typical shooter game. You think of like a Call of Duty or a Halo on normal. It poses some challenge, but Ultimately, it's just a fun jaunt through the game. You die a couple times, but you won't bang your head on the wall. You'll have a good time. Normal is harder than a normal shooter. This is more like a heroic or legendary mode for Halo. You'll be able to take a few hits before you die, and then your enemies will be much, much more spongy and much more difficult to kill. And then hard is simply hard. It is. It's made for people who enjoy a very difficult challenge. It is hard. Enemies are hard to kill. When there's multiple enemies, it's tough. When you trigger the security systems and you have a bunch of enemies kind of swarming you, they can make very, very short work of you. So if you're someone who enjoys difficult games, consider playing on hard. Now, I do think these are a little imbalanced, and I would love to see easy mode get like a 10% increase in difficulty, while normal probably needs a slight reduction. Hard is fine where it is, but normal was really rough at the start until I managed to assemble an arsenal. And then from there, I was humming along. It was great. So if you want, what I've been telling some of my friends is that start on easy. Play on easy until you get some upgrades and weapons. It's a little bit more enjoyable. And then maybe after, I would say like 5 or 6 hours, switch back to normal. You won't lose any progress. And then that is sort of where I would play the game out, because playing all the way through on normal, it was tough in the beginning. So let's talk about another big plus for the game, and that's visuals. So visuals looked visually appealing. This game looked gorgeous. The world they've crafted is stunning, and it definitely reminds me of sort of the opening scene for BioShock Infinite and how much I absolutely loved that sequence. This feels very similar, so if you're someone who is big on visuals, this game will not disappoint you. And the cool thing is, I haven't had any performance issues. I just rolled through the game. I think I crashed one time while I was recording, but other than that, like, it just, no FPS drops. It was rock solid. So let's talk about that world a little bit. We talked about the visuals. Now, visuals and world typically go hand in hand. So the world of Atomic Heart is both a plus and sort of a meh to negative bullet. So let me explain. So the world that they've put together is vast. It feels full of things to do, places to go. You see tons of stuff. There's statues, there's bridges, there's mag trains, there's vehicles. There's a ton of different things to interact and engage with. However, Atomic Heart suffers from a hub-based system. The map is peppered with points of interest, things like testing grounds, villages, huts, locations to loot, chests to farm, and they're all interconnected by roads. Now, this is where the issue lies. The roads are not exciting. The distance between two hubs is large enough that you either need to drive a car and avoid all of the wreckage and enemies, or you can hoof it there and blast your way through enemies while trying to avoid security. So instead of looking forward to the idea of seeing what the world has hidden away between the hubs, I was just dreading having to travel the distance to my next objective or to the testing ground that I needed to clear. It wasn't a fun and engaging experience. I would like to see them do something a little bit different between those hubs to maybe provide more incentive or have it be a little bit more engaging, because otherwise it was just an empty road with 3 or 4 enemies patrolling. Kill the enemies, continue moving forward until you meet the other 2 or 3 enemies, kill those enemies, rinse, repeat until you get to the next hub. So all in all, I mean, the world is somewhat lively and engaging. It's just the distance that you travel between those 2 points that takes some of that fun away. Okay, so let's talk about the other meh to negative items. So just to reiterate, these aren't things that are good or bad. They just sort of lack any sort of punch or excitement. They're just there. You don't look forward to interacting with them. So first up are upgrades. Now, when I first saw the screenshots, I was really hoping for a cool system that allowed you to really customize your weapons, make them really wild, do stuff that's crazy. Instead, we got minimal choices that required you to dump some materials in, and then once you unlocked them, then you can upgrade them. So it doesn't truly give you a huge variety per weapon. Instead, you sort of have 2 choices. Do you want it to do X or do you want it to do Y? That's about it. And you make the decision, you invest those materials, and then you move on. You can't really kind of strap all sorts of crazy stuff to them. And you get to make some alterations, like Vezdochka is a good one. So you can either make it so it shoots out your spinning blades to deal some range damage, or you can turn it into like an uppercut machine where you get up close and personal and you have sort of this like power attack that you can hit stuff with. So I was just imagining something a little bit more interactive and engaging, and this was sort of a letdown. Now, crafting is basically the same. Once you craft a weapon, that's it. You don't really need to craft it again unless you really need some of the parts. that weapon has. Then you can scrap it and just recraft it later. And I feel like this was another missed opportunity to have some cool mechanic, something that maybe like randomly rolls upgrades to give a place to sink materials in exchange for a uniquely modded weapon. Or maybe taking two weapons and being able to combine them together to do something pretty unique or different. Similar to the upgrade system, crafting, again, was just a little bit of a letdown. Now, in terms of actual negatives, things that pulled enjoyment away from the game, there were very, very, very few. And I'm very glad to say that, because most of the time games launch these days with huge issues and it just takes the wind completely out of my sails. But here, the biggest issues I ran into were a lack of field of view slider, no cutscene skip, which is rough for trying to go back and replay to see the alternate ending and things like that. So having to go through a whole bunch of cutscenes again is just rough. And then what I mentioned earlier about the world being dead between hubs, and then the less than stellar crafting and upgrade options. All of those things were bummers. They were a little bit let down. They didn't diminish my overall enjoyment of the game too much, but they were definitely noticeable. Now, Atomic Heart does have a DLC planned, and hopefully we get to see the story continue one way or another, because I'm very curious to see where both of these endings may lead. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this review of Atomic Heart, and if you like games like this, please consider liking and subscribing. Otherwise, have a wonderful day, and as always, this has been Vulkan, and I'll talk to you guys next time.